Hello and welcome to Creating a Human Rights Culture, which aims to promote a lived awareness of the interdependency and indivisibility of human rights principles in our minds, hearts, and bodies, that is, dragged into our everyday lives. What, after all, is freedom of speech to a person who is homeless and lives in a world at war? Therefore, it is dedicated ultimately to the application of the Human Rights Triptych, which in brief consists of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at its center, the conventions, that is, international treaties on the right, and implementation measures on the left. Hi, I'm Joseph Ronca, and this is episode 2, talking about August 9th as the International Day of the World's Indigenous People, and trying to get municipalities to sign on to a declaration that I came up with. Rolf Pabahtanumwe, my guest, who is one of the last surviving speakers of Nipmuc and also an Indigenous activist, trying to get them to sign the document and and obviously implement it. At least now we're sort of just kind of talking. So what I would like to do today is, or in this episode, is talk about some principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I'd just like to get your viewpoint, how you feel Indigenous people have been treated in regard to these principles. I have about 11. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do all of them now, but let's at least try. Before we do that, could you say something to the viewers in Nipmuc, if you don't mind?
Sure.
How are you doing? What's new, or whatever? Which means?
It's a good day, or hello, my friends. It's I don't think it's morning anymore, is it? It's most fun it's the morning. We're in the middle of the day. Well, to be polite, I'd like to say Tabane Karabaramish.
Okay.
Navichi Kumunal Swang Niskutayawash.
Okay.
Kiskukunigan, you Nayatuang, which I'm just saying, I want to thank you. I want to express my thanks, for your literally love, but your hospitality and graciousness.
Hospitality of Amherst Media. That's
Kumunal Swang.
We're lucky.
And Kutayawash, your grace or whatever on this day, this blessing, because each day is a blessing.
Certainly. Very simply, how would you say thank you and you're welcome?
When can we say
that
welcome,
in the culture?
Which means
how do you say thank you?
We don't go about saying it as casually, I think, or as it's like I wouldn't want to say it's perfunctory, but it's a given, or at least when I was raised in English Western society, that when you have to say thank you for each thing, but I don't think it's as common amongst Indigenous people. And a lot of the societies are meant to just say this casually. It's usually said more often when somebody's deeply thankful for something. But we're interacting socially, so you have to understand each other's culture. So I say thank you more often when interacting with different groups, because to make sure.
With a white man.
But anyway, so thank you is just Tabutni.
Okay. How is it?
Tabutni.
Tobatni.
Tabutni.
Tobatni.
Ne.
Ne.
It's between I and E. Like Cree. Cree very often, E and I close. Very close. But anyway.
Okay, got it.
Tabutni.
We have a whole
and a lot of people
here,
just say Tabutni, and you're welcome is Wunigan, which means beautiful.
What's beautiful?
Wunigan.
Wonikan.
Wunigan, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Let's go on to this agenda. Well, that was the agenda. But anyway, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples says that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination, to develop past, present, and future manifestations of culture, such as archaeological sites. I know that's kind of a bailiwick of yours. Artifacts, ceremonies, literature, and visual performing arts to transmit languages, oral traditions, retain own names for communities, the right to maintain indigenous-making institutions, the right to autonomy and self-government in regard to culture, media, health, housing, and cooperation across borders. I kind of like that personally.
It's beautiful. I wish you could accomplish those things in a real way for everybody. You know, of course, things haven't come, you know, fully.
Yeah, by the way, this is in solidarity with other oppressed groups as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I keep on thinking of, let's say, Dick Gregory, who just passed away. He was an African-American comedian, but as social activist, he was always trying to advance indigenous rights. And indigenous people also try to advance African-American rights. So we're in this together.
Like you said,
I didn't
Dr.
mean to
King,
interrupt.
the Reverend Dr. King, like you said,
Yes.
you know, yeah, everybody's problem is my problem. You know, we are, to go to the biblical Judeo-Christian end of things, we are our brothers and sisters keepers.
Right.
I don't know why that would ever come into question. Who else? If we were going to look after each other, who is going to look after us? Yeah, you know, and those are beautiful aspirations. I think you know, these statements about
How are we doing? Yeah.
not very well.
Okay.
Many nations have made really strident and brave efforts with the help of a lot of enthusiastic, you know, non-Indigenous people, I'd like to say, which is also a reality of how civil rights was accomplished for African Americans, the help of a lot of non-African American people who are enthusiastic supporters. But many nations have begun immersion programs for adults and children, so recover language, cultural programs. For better or for worse, a lot of these are attached to fees. I believe in, whenever possible, providing things free of fee for two reasons. No individual, in my book, owns a culture or has the right to sell it. It belongs to people together.
Yes.
I feel like the nation has the right to collect monies to support culture, but individually, I prefer to give what was given to me to those who wish to receive.
Yes.
You know, but they're making a lot of efforts to support culture. There's a lot of interactive grants within and between outside entities and indigenous nations to support culture. There's, for instance, at Great Falls right now, there's a Building Bridges mural program that I'm actually participating in. Where at the Discovery Center, one of the walls that doesn't have, they have beautiful murals. If you haven't gone there, please go to Great Falls and over by Deerfield and Turner's Falls and Greenfield. And there's a Discovery Center. They have beautiful murals, and we're going to add one. And it's a cooperative project between several indigenous artists, and assisted by also one of the artists is actually non-indigenous, but is working with an indigenous person on that panel. There's 4 panels. It's intertribal, it's interracial, it's intercultural, it's international, and it's building bridges. And the whole point is to bring out positive interaction in the historical context between cultures in that spot where, you know, such a regrettable atrocity occurred with the massacre of over 300, mostly women, children, and old folks. Actually, almost entirely, because the grown men weren't actually not present at that. They were distracted away so that this massacre could occur, and then they immediately took their revenge. But it's an all way around. There's no happiness. Nobody extracted joy out of that. So.
Just want to say, when I was in Alaska, I was feeling a little guilty, to tell you the truth, being a white man sort of helping indigenous people. I'm just telling you, but what they told me was there was a prophet, Menelik, who prophesied that white people were coming. And he would say some were going to be good and some were going to be bad. And it's okay to work with them. I guess that was a good one.
That's a beautiful prophecy, and I'm glad that you put that out there.
So viewers out there, you know, we're all in this together. I just have to say, you told me something about when they were building Route 2, they found bones of indigenous people that were carbon dated before 1492.
Oh yeah.
And you thought that they should at least have some kind of recognition, some kind of cemetery, because as you go through Western Mass, there's all kinds of
There's a lot
to
to that,
Europeans.
but to put it in a nutshell, but I want to address it. About
Wonderful.
prophecy. There were many prophecies actually amongst many nations about people coming at the time, and personally, through my connection to Lenape culture, there was a Lenape individual who had vision about 12 years before the arrival of people in Jamestown, had visions of people coming in large boats with pinions, with flight feathers on them, and repeated this vision at the annual ceremony for 12 years until they finally did actually arrive. So he was trying to warn his people. But anyway, it's called Wissatinawag. Wisati is, Wisue is yellow, Wisati is glistening, and Nawag is a hill, and it refers to the hill above Great Falls. It's a big basalt rock, and there's a cemetery there that actually, there was some archaeological investigations saying that it goes back between 85 and 10,000 years or more. We only know how much we get evidence for. We don't know where that ends. There were at least 2 villages in the immediate vicinity, and what happened was basically they wanted to build an extension to Route 2. A private person owned that land. They dug up, they were buried in a perched sand area above the river, and they started excavating for fill. So when you go on Route 2 over the French King Bridge towards Greenfield, we now have a 2 and 2A, and in order to create that, they filled in around White Ash Swamp. White Ash or Green Ash? White Ash, I think it is. And there's a maintenance area there that you can see to this day, and all that sand is filled with the bones of our dead. Some of them as recent as that massacre in the 1700s, and some as old as 8,000 or 10,000 years.
Me the image of the Holocaust.
So in 1963 or 4, George Nelson reported this, and sometime in that, subsequent to that, very close by, he brought the skeleton of a young female to UMass Amherst, who has a fiduciary responsibility then to follow the law concerning that rendering of those bones. And they confirmed that it was a 20-ish female, a Native American, deceased, quite old is what they said, very old. Subsequent, there was a more thorough investigation, like I said, and some dates were put back 8,500, 10,000 years. The excavations there never ceased, even though laws were installed in between, providing protections. The excavation never ceased, even up to 1998. In 93, I started writing letters of complaint to successive governors and commissioners and secretaries of the Commonwealth to no effect. Like, I never even received, Deval Patrick is the only person who ever even responded.
Oh, that was nice of him.
Yeah, to the complaints about, a desecration of a burial ground. And it was about 80% destroyed when Friends of Wissatinawag interceded and with private monies purchased the land from Mr. Mack for some many millions of dollars. And then the state got out of that quite a few acres of conservation land gratis. A bunch of people who, both native and non-native, came together to rescue. What remained was reconsecrated, we've done our best to put that at rest. The bones have not been repatriated to their proper space, and unfortunately, neither the Mohican nor the Nipmuc really have been, central to the ceremonies to put this at peace. So it's been out-of-state people and people who don't historically find their home territories. On the east of the Connecticut here, in that area, are the Nipmuc, and on the west are Mohican peoples that we refer to as Norwood-Tucks and Pocumtucks. So those are places, but they're all Mohican people, speaking peoples. So both the nations that live there are unrepresented in this situation. The Nipmuc have had some involvement in that, but it's been kind of off and on and not central. So the situation was never really, according to UN principles, handled appropriately at any point, and continues not to be handled appropriately. The actual peoples who represent those dead are not centrally involved at any point.
Yeah, I'd like to. I was at an Indigenous conference once in Oklahoma, and the keynote speaker said that, I believe it was the Smithsonian, they wanted to get the bones back, and they sent the bones back in cardboard boxes with pellets, the styrofoam pellets, and he said it was totally undignified, and they can't believe that this is being done. So this is what's going on.
They were surprised to discover that's how they're actually kept, but yeah, it happens. I've gone to university, I've seen, bones of relatives sitting in a hallway in cardboard boxes on shelves outside of an office.
So this is great stuff, but I notice time is running out. What I'm going to do is get some principles from UN DRIP, which viewers should know.
Can we look at the ones 7 through 9? Those are particularly keen.
What's that?
On 7 through 9, I think, are particularly...
Okay, 7 through 9. Non-discrimination, so Indigenous people should have non-discrimination in labor and employment and salary. There must be special measures for continuing improvement in economic and social conditions, where Indigenous people shall determine strategies and priorities and administer them. The right to traditional medicines and health practices, such as vital medicines, plants, animals, and minerals. The right to distinctive spiritual and material relationship with lands, waters, seas, sea ice, flora, fauna, and to prevent state interference and encroachment upon those rights, and full recognition of cultural and intellectual property, requiring special measures necessary to control, develop, and protect genetic resources, seeds, medicines, and knowledge of cultural traditions. The floor is yours.
That's the point on which I think
hope you viewers will read this stuff. Okay, and we're going to have a reading, by the way, Puffer's Pond, August 9th at 7. Bring your bathing suit. Just come. Or don't bring your
Should be good weather.
Okay, go ahead. Rain or shine.
Those last two, I think, are where we're doing worst. Although, everything in there is very critical to survival when it comes to access to traditional medicinal practices and access to the materials that support those practices and access to materials that support culture and even just access to the physical access in order for us to continue our traditional ceremonies are all things that we are continually denied. We're denied access to traditional places of worship. Policies by the DCR and other entities are executed such that they destroy the biodiversity that we depend upon in order to continue our traditional medicinal practices. I am the medicine elder of the Native American Intertribal Council of Western Massachusetts. I've been traditionally trained. I find it increasingly, and in my short lifetime, I am technically Halusis, I'm technically a middle-aged, a young elder, but I'm not a, my
young
life
to
is,
me.
right?
Yeah, okay.
I'm pushing 60. In my short lifetime, I have watched entire, what you might call apothecary mountains, entire places that were special places of collection of medicine and medicine practice turn into almost deserts because of biodiversity loss, where all the medicines necessary are suddenly vanished. And it may sound like an exaggeration, but it's really not. A case in point is a section of the Green River, Pecamagon, that holds special soils and special plants, a very place rich in healing, between quote-unquote sustainable farms digging wild ramps on public land that they then market to the point where they've extinguished the wild ramps from that place. And people personalizing public beach space by making stoneworks and rather egocentric sculptures in what's actually publicly, communally owned land, public space. It's not your land to personalize, it's not your land to dig. And technically, the DCR, anywhere you're on DCR land, is against their bylaws to tamper with any mineral or plant. But it's not enforced, and I can personally tell you, in a very vital stretch of the Pecamagon, where as a member of New England Wildflower Society, I studied rare plants, and also as a medicinal person who went there continually for medicines in a traditional fashion, in a fashion that we were able to balance and carry forward for thousands of years without damaging our environment. It is now a situation where, I don't want to take time, but
No,
three different plants that have state endangerment classification have been eradicated from the zone. And actually, I recently visited, and all the vegetation in the entire zone, along the riparian vegetation along the beach areas that people visit, have been completely eradicated. There's almost nothing growing there at this point. We've returned to a point that I last witnessed back in 1976, I think it was, when people were always driving trucks down there, and they finally closed that off to truck traffic, and the river recovered. Now without vehicles, we've revisited that just by the habit of individuals who've come to this point where everybody feels so free and so egocentric that a public space is there to personalize and get creative with and modify. And even though it's a conservation space, nobody seems, to the point where everything is eradicated, nobody seems to respect the fact that this is a conservation space. This is public land. And as far as Indigenous people having the right to access our medicines and our materials and our culture, forget it. It's not on anybody's radar.
incredible.
Actually, Intercontinental Cry recently did an article that I was solicited for about that, and it is published last year. It specifically addressed that issue of being unable to continue culture because of lack of access to materials and sites. It's even a challenge to continue to access the information to transfer it generation to generation. But even if people know what to do, if they can't go to a sacred place, if they can't obtain medicinal materials, if they can't pilgrimage through an area, what can we do? It's just something you can put in a book and read about, but it doesn't really exist if you can't do it, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean.
But I think it points out the practical end of I think we like to aspire to things, and nationally we like to embrace them on the international scene because it makes us look good. But looking good may be very important to people, and there's an awful lot of focus on what your public profile is and what people are saying about you and how that looks. But we can be totally lost in this and get lost to the point of vanishing our culture as it is if we don't understand that it doesn't really matter how things look. What matters is how we live this. So we need to live the things we're saying, and it's not really so hard, really.
A lived awareness of human rights. That's what I say.
Yeah, and this is the time what you're talking about. This is time critical. The whole world really needs to understand human rights culture. And all it is, it's such just give a smidgen of something to your fellow human and all the other creatures that share the world with you. It used to be so easy to do, and somehow we've become so ungiving that we won't restrain ourselves a little bit and give a little respect to everybody else. If we just hold back our hands a little bit, save a little bit, conserve a little bit, restrain our, just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should. And just because they can't stop you doesn't mean that they should not stop you. So let's restrain ourselves, and I hope that we can become the people that our ancestors would be proud of. And let's not fool ourselves that the people who came before us don't aspire to the best in us. They do inspire to the best in us, and I, for one, I would like to make our ancestors proud of what we've become. And that's the best I can say.
That sounds great. I'm glad we were able to put that on tape.
I think what you're doing this is vital right now.
Well, what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we just lived through like a century that's just marked by genocide.
Yeah, I was going to say that. That was one thing. Those principles are good, but a major principle they have here in the document is there must be full guarantees against genocide, such as the right to enforcement of treaties, which is...
People have to respond when they see genocide happening in the world.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to stop playing games about whether it's really genocide. If people are dying and they're receiving no defense, in numbers for having genocide, we need to stop playing political games about what is it not really genocide. We need to stop ignoring things like,
like
Rwanda,
President
Burundi.
Clinton did, as I understand it, during Rwanda. He refused to call that genocide because we signed the genocide treaty, and that would mean we had all kinds of obligations. And many of the people there were indigenous, I'm sure.
And followed by Darfur and on and on and on like this.
Yes, and also the Congo.
East
Don't get me
Timor.
started on that one.
Yeah, the Congo, East Timor, Papua New Guinea, Irian Jaya is the...
Darfur is Muslim against Muslim, and it whips up hate. The Congo is sort of a Christian thing, but nobody talks about it.
Darfur is mostly
it's
Muslims
terrible.
killing Christians and animists.
And also Muslims.
Well, to some extent, but I think largely the victims are targeted. Actually, there's purposely targeting Christians and animists. So South Sudan is majority Christian and animist, traditionalist.
Okay, all right.
And North Sudan is like 90% Muslim. Not to vilify Muslims because,
yeah, we don't want to do that.
But we do I hate to say it, but even Buddhists are guilty of genocide, as we see in Myanmar.
And obviously Christians.
And in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, yes.
They deprive Tamils of their right to representation.
We have 1 minute. You've given us enough words of wisdom. I thought maybe, how would you like to end the show? I always like to ask people, what shall we do? Is there anything that you would say what we should do?
I think what people need to do is recognize what you're doing, and other people like you. Ms. Dalikopoulos is the UN Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous People, and I think people should know her name.
She was on the show once, yes.
Yeah, she was on your show.
Okay.
First time I got to see this very important person speak, and I'm a person who tries to pay attention to this issue, so that says that probably very few people have seen this person, but she's a very important person and in this world and fighting for all Indigenous people. So I think we should hear from her more, we should hear from you more, we should hear from the UN High Council on Human Rights more. And yeah, and all the people who are supporting. We have friends in South America and Ecuador right now who, we had Standing Rock here, they had a Chinese mining company in Cochabamba region that was destroying everything, the people's ability to live healthy there. They won their court case. Yaku Carlos Perez Guatemala, who's the head of a multinational Andean indigenous group, they won their court case, but then he was labeled a terrorist by the Ecuadorian government almost right after. So we need to support other people too who are trying to do the right thing.
Stop the violence, stop the genocide, and listen to others. I'd like to add, get your municipality to sign the Western Massachusetts Declaration.
It doesn't negate or substitute any other observation. It's a world observation to gather together. So I'd just like to point out that we're not trying to get rid of Columbus Day saying this. We're not trying to get rid of Native American Day. It's an additional.
Okay, so we got to go. I forgot, how do you say thank you again?
Tabatni.
Tabatni. Tabatni. Thank you.
Winnie.
Tabatni.
Winnie.
Okay, great to have you. So take care, everyone, and take care of others as needs be, and hope to see you again.